someone in the comments of the Reset Race video, I think it was the second to the last one or maybe the last one, mentioned that Brihana Joy Gray was defending Tucker Carlson. And like when that manifesto came out, people read it and it was stricken down. I'm in the process of getting it. I know somebody who has it. But I watched Yvette Carnell, Jason Black, or listened to them read it. So I'm speaking off of having heard it a couple times, knowing what's in it, but I don't have it with me right now to where I can just read it verbatim and speak like, like I read it personally. And there's so this is a response video to Brihana Joy Gray. And let me say that I can't stand this woman. I really don't like her. Like I get why Sam from Reset Ray says she hates her. It's very easy. She is the face of the alt left. She is the face of anti-black racism on the left. And it's a pretty and deceptive face. Now I've watched most of this. I said half, maybe I think I've watched 60, 70%. I watched up to the point where it really starts to fall off a cliff. And I also caught the very ending. Some of it is kind of new to me, but I caught the ending because I wanted to fast forward and kind of see what the other people on the panel, and the other people on the panel are very alt-leftish too. And if you're not familiar with the alt-left, if your idea of liberal racism is like paternal shit, or it's Obama speaking to black men in ways that he would not speak to white men, or if it's just like my understanding is that you're okay with reparations for everyone and everything, but not for the descendants of slavery, neo-slavery, genocide, economic apartheid, mass incarceration, and now another example of the terrorism that's gone on forever in this nation, in this nation's existence. It's ever, beginning to the end, before the beginning. So let's just get to it. I'm rambling.
In Buffalo, New York, by a self-described white supremacist who specifically sought out a predominantly black community and traveled 200 miles to kill black people. Among those killed were Roberta Dury, age 32, who loved Whitney Houston, Ruth Whitfield, 86, a devoted grandmother, Celestine Chaney, 65, a breast cancer survivor, and Andre McNeil, 53, who was at the supermarket picking up a cake for his 3-year-old son. Although some are trying to cast this homicidal event as just another murder in the context of a country that is always dealing with the consequences of having more guns than people, racism is not incidental to this story. In a lengthy document left by the killer, he explicitly lamented that because white populations on average have lower birth rates, that white people are making up a smaller and smaller proportion of the global and national population. To him, this is a problem. And his solution? To kill black people with a gun on which he had written, "Here's your reparations."
She starts off, okay, this is what happened. I can't argue. Like, there's no spin in this first minute. This is what happened. She even mentions the "here's your reparations" on the gun. So all is starting off well. If you're wondering, well, what's your problem so far, 42? I don't really have a problem so far. She's really speaking like a news reporter. The spin has not begun, but it's coming.
Black people with a gun on which he had written, "Here's your reparations." As you've likely heard by now, the idea that white Americans are threatened by demographic changes is known as the Great Replacement theory. It's a narrative that first gained traction on explicitly white supremacist websites before being mainstreamed by conservative commentators. In the wake of the Buffalo massacre, Tucker Carlson has come under scrutiny as perhaps the most high-profile purveyor of this narrative. He, of course, does not advocate for physical violence against non-white populations or anyone. In fact, Tucker Carlson is fastidiously race-neutral in his language, frequently adopting the famous colorblind quote from Martin Luther King, in stressing that his interest is in protecting American culture and the American way of life. In fact, Fox News just tweeted this out on Monday. So, what does Carlson say that has some liberals
Paul, wait,
accusing him of culpability? Let's take a listen.
Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. Let's say that again for emphasis, because it is the secret to the entire immigration debate. Demographic change is the key to the Democratic Party's political ambitions. In other words, you're being replaced and there's nothing you can do about it. So shut up. I mean, they're trying to change the...
He's showing a picture of an Asian man when he says this. Like, you can watch the video. I'm not going to pull the whole clip from the Hill. She's trying to make an argument that his position is race neutral, and she's doing that to defend him. That's pretty flawed, but I'll let that continue.
Because it's true. Our country's being invaded by the rest of the world. Let me just state unequivocally, the country's being stolen from American citizens as we watch. In political terms, this policy is called the Great Replacement, the replacement of legacy Americans with more obedient people from faraway countries.
Now, liberals interpret these statements about, America being stolen, etc., as dog whistles, as veiled references to a white way of life. But Tucker Carlson never says that explicitly. And the more liberals accuse him of broadly being racist without being able to articulate why what he said is wrong, the more Tucker gains credibility. And the more he entrenches his coveted victim status. He's primed his audience for exactly that type of "you're a racist" attack. Take a listen.
A quick programming note: as the debate over immigration has risen to the top of the news in recent weeks, a number of figures on the left have denounced this show as racist. It's notable that not a single one of them has offered any evidence to support that slur, or even bothered to rebut the arguments that we make every night. They just make loud noises about white supremacy and assume that's an argument. Of course, the rest of the media dutifully repeat that.
Tucker's right. Liberals have largely been unspecific about what their concerns are with the Great Replacement rhetoric.
Pause. She moved the goalposts. The point is, do liberals, and this is where she started, are liberals, and I agree, they are unspecific with the Great Replacement rhetoric, but they're not unspecific when they accuse Tucker Carlson of spitting out white supremacist dog whistles. Like, his head writer was a white supremacist.
Tucker's right. Liberals have largely been unspecific about what their concerns are with the Great Replacement rhetoric. But I will be. Tucker claims that his problem with immigration is that it will fundamentally change the voter rolls of the country to benefit Democrats. This is an explicitly political argument, not a racial one, which is...
Okay, her first minute, reporting the news, reporting what happened. I wish she would have mentioned all of their names. The next 3 minutes was complete spin. But she's talking about a guy who has spit out enough racist dog whistles to where it's built in. He doesn't have to say anything. He doesn't have to be explicit. And just saying that we're getting replaced, Americans are getting replaced, is all you really need to know, because there's enough of that one drop sentiment amongst white people in America to where, regardless if it's a group crossing the border that looks brown or looks as white as them, it's enough that isn't them, and that's it. I mean, these are the 1/16th one drop type folks. So, yeah, a lot of Latinos that come to this country, they identify as white. I'll be the first one to say that. But white people don't necessarily identify them as white. And definitely racists don't. But let's remember the first minute. Who was attacked? So the question is, are liberals specific when they talk about Tucker Carlson's racism. And sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But if they're talking about how he had a writer who was a white supremacist, which I did, I'm a liberal, and if they talk about how Tucker Carlson is denied the influence of white supremacy, then you're either dealing with someone who's incompetent. You don't think white supremacy has an influence. You have the lead show on, like the lead news show, the lead pundit news show. You don't think white supremacy has an influence. Your head writer is a white supremacist. I don't like repeating myself. It gets redundant. I don't like when other people do it. But this deserves repeating because I made this point. Others, Jesse Dollemore has made this point.
I have done video after video after video after video about Tucker Carlson and his white supremacist leanings at one point, and then just full-blown white supremacist propagandist, talking about white genocide and civil war from his broadcast spot, his chair at Fox News. Tucker Carlson is now full-blown racist, white nationalist, white supremacist who hires racist, white nationalist, white supremacists. And we'll get to that. But I've seen this over the course of this last weekend because this story broke that Tucker Carlson's top writer, his head writer of the show, quit after he was outed his pseudonym, his secret name that he was writing under on these racist blogs all over the internet, that he was outed and he quit. And I saw a lot of comments of people saying, well, who's surprised by this? Of course he is. That's no secret. Stop saying that. Stop acting as though just because it's something we knew or something we suspected and now know that, well, that's no secret.
Your lead writer was exposed as a racist white supremacist with white supremacist rhetoric. I think it was in their maybe Reddit account or some form of social media. You, on your show, which is the most popular news show in the country, you deny the role of white supremacy. Either this dude is incompetent, which I don't think he is, or he is white supremacy. So it's built in, because even if you go, like, let's go back. Tucker has sent so many dog whistles that that the fact that she just accepts this thing where he can change his rhetoric and take race out of it, that doesn't matter. As an example of a YouTube channel.
A black politician.
Hold on, let me start from the beginning.
Iraq is a crappy place filled with a bunch of, semi-literate primitive monkeys.
Iraq is filled with semi-literate primitive monkeys. Now I want you to remember that. Iraq is filled with semi-illiterate primitive monkeys.
About how you don't like me because I'm black. Using racism as a defense, right? I catch you doing something that, you're a racist. The Congressional Black Caucus exists to blame the white man for everything. And I'm happy to say that in public because it's true. Everybody knows it's true. White men have, they've contributed some, I would say, like creating civilizations. Stuff I think they've done.
Now, he's saying that white people had created civilization and stuff. Now, civilization came out of Melanatedville, ancient Egypt. It gets the credit a lot of times, but they built off of stuff that was further down the Nile. But let's go back. You know who else also gets a lot of credit for civilization? Sumer, right? And where's Sumer? Iraq. The land of the semi-literate primitive monkeys. This is 43 seconds into a 5-minute video. And he's already credited white people for starting civilization while calling the non-African wing of the early, pretty much the first 5,000-6,000 years of what we would consider the birth of civilization, Sumer, he's already called
My
them
biggest
primitive
problem with the
monkeys.
way all this is framed is the way all this is framed. Like they keep talking about gun control and, oh, this is a racial attack, and that's not the way I see it. To me, this is an attempted genocide.
Now, the other thing that we've got to come to see now that many of us didn't see too well during the last 10 years, that is that racism is still alive in American society and much more widespread than we realize. And we must see racism for what it is. It is a myth of the superior and the inferior race. It is the false and tragic notion that one particular group, one particular race is responsible for all of the progress, all of the insights, and the total flow of history. And the theory that another group or another race is totally depraved, innately impure, and innately inferior. And in the final analysis, racism is evil because its ultimate logic is genocide. Hitler was a sick and tragic man who carried racism to its logical conclusion. And he ended up leading a nation to the point of killing about 6 million Jews. And this is the tragedy of racism because its ultimate logic is genocide. If one says that I am not good enough to live next door to him, if one says that I am not good enough to eat at a lunch counter, or to have a good, decent job, or to go to school with him, merely because of my race, he is saying consciously or unconsciously that I do not deserve to exist.
Like he was actively trying to like provoke a race war that ultimately ends in all black people being murdered in this country because we can't be deported. So like if someone attempted genocide in the country and all you have to say is, well, we need more gun control, fuck you. Like you would never allow this to happen to anyone else but black people. And this has consistently been my problem. Like a lot of the times, like this is what ignoring black issues ultimately gets you. When you can ignore that black people are being murdered in the streets, when someone decides they want to make a political statement, they just go murder some black people because they know you're not going to trip. And what do you think the next one's going to do? It's got to be bigger than this, right? Because this didn't get no kind of news coverage for real. So the next one, he's going to have to get at least 100, right?
Close my eyes, I can still hear my only saying. Always the helwa al-hurriya. Always the helwa al-hurriya. Always the helwa al-hurriya. Where is our freedom? This is for Baghdad, the place of my mother's birth, the cradle of civilization for what it's worth. The land I've never seen, culture I've never known. Iraq is in my heart, my blood, my flesh and bones. The air I've never breathed, fragrance I've never smelled, pride I've never had, the nationality that I've never felt. Saddam was bad party, Americans even more so. They made me grow like I was missing part of my torso. But I never picked up a grenade in my garden. I never saw people I loved die starving. I never saw my family die through many years of sanctions, while the ruler's family lived in palaces and mansions. I never had a family member kidnapped for a ransom. I never lost a friend to violence that was random. Women's occupation, torture, intimidation. 1 million dead people doesn't equal liberation.
And the whole thing, like if he criticizes the Congressional Black Caucus, I'm probably going to agree with him. I mean, everything he said isn't a lie, but to say that he isn't positioning himself to where he doesn't have to just come out and say, hey, they replacing white people, and this isn't a dog whistle to murderous terrorists. This is the spin in the next 3 minutes that she used to defend this dude. So I'm going to go back to Bree. Like I'll flash this video on my video if you want to see it. First 43 seconds, And we're already jumping over the melanated veil. And remember, where does European civilization come out of? It don't come from Iceland, Norway, Denmark. European civilization comes out of what's next to Africa, from melanated veil. And like I said, he could talk shit about the CBC and all that.
Basketball? Come on.
He's black. Say it. He's a real brother.
I'm talking about Obama.
I don't know how black he is, but I'm sure he's a good basketball player. He says he is anyway.
I've been watching Obama's wife. Is it Michelle?
Michelle, yeah.
It seems like they might have her on. They might be whitening her a little bit. What do you think?
I tell you what, yesterday she got ghetto and started snapping her neck. I'm like, that's a real sister right there.
No, she needs to do less of that, man. People in Indiana, Pennsylvania.
She's going to be a problem for him. She's got an edge to her that's bad.
Yeah, I agree.
People expressing their opinions in America, that's bad.
Yeah, she starts getting.
I'm no Michelle Obama fan, but that sounds kind of low-key racist. Like, what does she have that's bad? Back then, before he was president. Like, right now, we can have our issues with Michelle. But what did she show that was bad back then? Like, this is dog whistling without just... I mean, what else do you have to do? Do you have to get a gun and go shoot somebody before you're a racist? Before you are white supremacy on the largest show? Do we have to discover that your writer was a white supremacist? What does it take? So I'm calling Bree out. To me, everything is spin after that first minute. But I remember she starts to go back and starts to tell some truth and mixes truth with the spin. But she spins to get to that framework. Because if she was going to be honest, liberals have been calling Tucker Carlson out for being a racist for a while. And there's a whole bunch of racist shit that Tucker Carlson says. So he doesn't have to come out and say, hey, look, this replacement thing, it's not just Americans. It's white people who are going to be replaced. He doesn't have to come out and say that.
Political argument, not a racial one, which is why the claims of racism fall flat. But there's no need to evoke racism to find some fault here. Take a listen to this.
This is Bree being Bree at her best. This is why, and here's the thing. Bree is an anti-black racist. She's just savvy. Because her whole thing, even though she came out and said they shot up black, because we know it ain't no damn lone wolf, shot up black people. Mentioned what was on the hilt of the gun. First minute was fine. Now she's going to try to deracialize this. And the reason why she wants to deracialize it is because the alt-left knows that black people are a captured vote. So we don't really need their vote. We don't have to offer them anything. Sounds familiar. The alt-left is a lot like the left in that sense. But what they want to do is reach out to the right. And they reach out to the right without a black agenda. Their agenda is basically Bernie Sanders. That's alt-left in a nutshell. And I will show some examples later. But let me keep going, because this is what she's doing.
But there's no need to evoke racism to find some fault here. Take a listen to this.
Really? The worst attack on our democracy in 160 years? How about the Immigration Act of 1965? That law completely changed the composition of America's voter rolls purely to benefit the Democratic Party. That seems like kind of an assault on democracy, a permanent one. But no, that was a good thing because in the end it helped Joe Biden.
So in that clip, Tucker Carlson argues that the Immigration Act of 1965 was the greatest attack on our democracy since the Civil War. So what was the Immigration Act of 1965? Well,
God, this is why she does not represent black people. She is anti-black. All this dude has to say is the Civil War, meaning that trying to keep slavery and divide the Union was a great attack. So he makes a little anti-slavery message. But if you're trying to say that our immigration policies, which I'm personally not a fan of, I'd agree with Tucker on the policies, was the greatest attack on democracy since the Civil War, That is a racist dog whistle, because basically what he's saying is forget all of these race riots, forget all of these, this summer of lynching, like Rosewood. Forget about Colfax. Like what's that one in Arkansas? Elaine massacre. And God, Tulsa. So yeah, by leaving all of that out, I think there was also something in
It eliminated
Atlanta.
the national origins quota system.
No.
Before 1965, Southern and Eastern Europeans, Asians, and other non-Western European or Northern European groups were severely limited in their ability to immigrate to this country. The Immigration Act of 1965 undid earlier discriminatory immigration acts like the Chinese Exclusion Act that explicitly barred racial groups not on any type of merit-based system, but because they were considered to be from culturally or racially inferior countries. Now, the immigration system that Tucker speaks about nostalgically did get some big-name approval from across the pond. One notable national leader said admiringly of our system, quote, "The American Union categorically refuses the immigration of physically unhealthy elements and simply excludes the immigration of certain races." End quote. It's a nice compliment, tarnished somewhat by the fact that it's a quote from Mein Kampf. Tucker expressly laments the end of an immigration system that established quotas based on the perceived unworthiness of not just non-whites, but Italians, Eastern Europeans, as well as Asians and Africans. Now, Italians and other European groups were considered white prior to the 20th century, but if you think their inclusion on this list makes the list not racist, that's perfectly fine. But it is reflective of a bias that has nothing to do with American ideals, whether these groups share American values or whether they make good citizens. And that's what Tucker says he cares about, the rights of American citizens and the preservation of an American way of life. In the earlier clip, he complained that Democrats were replacing old voters with new voters.
I gotta pause it. Do you hear the hypocrisy? This is insane. This is absolutely insane. She just demonstrated how the dude is racist. He's mad because they tweaked the law that banned certain people and it was quoted by Mein Kampf. That's racist shit. They tweaked the law so it didn't ban certain people. We were like, okay, if we're going to have people immigrate, we'll open it to the world instead of saying, no, you can't come because you're inferior. We'll make it not racist. And like I said, I'm not a fan of our immigration system, but turning something that's racist into not racist is a good thing. Because, and she'll get to why in a minute, but I told you, she'll go back and forth. How can you take race out of it in that second, third, and fourth minute and say that Democrats aren't specific, ignore that he's set himself up to be a dog whistler, ignore Dollemore, and, I think he's probably the one that's done it the best, but it's not just Dollemore, like the Rational National, the Humanists. I'm pretty sure that they've called Tucker Carlson out for his racism. Pretty sure.
This is becoming a crowded country, and crowded countries are ugly, unhappy countries.
Fox News host Tucker Carlson contradicted himself over two segments a couple weeks apart. Now, this is actually quite revealing, as you'll see. So let me just first play the first clip here.
So we spent the last year hearing about a health crisis, a pandemic, but there are a lot of health crises. This may be the biggest one. Falling testosterone levels, which have completely reshaped our society, and falling sperm counts, which may make it impossible to continue the human race.
So, falling sperm counts, a threat to humanity, as you see right there, threat to humanity. Now, let's go a couple weeks later and see what his big worry is this time.
Has there ever been an administration this reckless and destructive? What's happening on the border tonight will change this country forever. A lot of things won't. This will, and you should know that. Unlike other disasters, mass illegal immigration is permanent. No one ever really gets sent home. Over the past 30 years, the population of the United States has exploded by nearly 100 million people, mostly due to immigration. Were you even aware that that happened? You're not supposed to say a word about it, as every year the United States gets steadily more jammed with people and at the same time more chaotic and less cohesive. As the open spaces shrink, as nature itself recedes in the face of yet another strip mall or apartment complex or fast food outlet to serve the new people. This is becoming a crowded country, and crowded countries are ugly, unhappy countries. Why are we letting that happen?
I think you can see what's going on here. So, on one hand, 2 weeks ago, threat to humanity, low sperm count. Not enough babies. There's not enough babies in the country. 2 weeks later, we are in a crowded country. Crowded countries are ugly, unhappy countries. Too many babies. Now there's too many people. What's the difference? Well, on one hand, he's talking about white people. On the other, he's talking about people from other countries.
American institutions. This country was founded on white supremacy. So it's not like it ever went away, but there was indeed a resurgence. And he saw this resurgence around the time that Obama was elected president, where, there was this revolt against the idea that somebody who isn't white became president of the United States. We all thought that this was, the signal that America is moving on, or trying to move on, at least from its racist past. And, people in the country, they decided to do the opposite. Many people decided to revolt. Many people didn't like seeing a black man as president. That led to the birther movement with Donald Trump and et cetera. But what he sees is not only the resurgence of white supremacy, but this normalization of it, this mainstreaming of white supremacy that didn't necessarily exist when he was younger. Like when he was young, he talked about, the things that he would say just to his friends in his musical group that you never hear on mainstream media. You never hear in conservative circles, but the things that was confined to white supremacist circles, he's saying is now mainstream. It's dominant in conservative circles. And he has a couple of examples here. First, there is the more blatant conspiracy-oriented language regarding the others controlling the power structure that is starting to exist in the language of QAnon in terms of talking about globalism. But also, more specifically, what's penetrated the right is replacement theory, or the Great Replacement. What I mean by that is white supremacists believe that the demographics of the country are changing rapidly, and that soon white people will lose agency and power because they will be the minority. Whether that is happening statistically or not is a different story, because what white supremacists believe is that it is an intentional process being put forward by global cabals of, in most cases, Jewish people who are trying to upset the balance of white power. White supremacists claim that diversity is genocide for the white race. They believe that the promotion of multiculturalism is a tool of white genocide. We've started to hear those ideas and similar ideas come out of Tucker Carlson, a Fox News host with millions of viewers. It isn't just people like me when I was hanging out in dark alleys reading pamphlets from other conspiracy theorists. People are now getting this theory and hatred from Donald Trump and various people in his orbit. They are getting it from Paul Gosar, a Republican congressman from Arizona. These are people with suits and ties. They look like the mainstream. They sound like the mainstream, and in certain cases, they've been elected to powerful positions by the mainstream, and yet they are saying the same dangerous and outlandish things that a 17-year-old Christian Piccolini said when he was sporting a swastika tattoo. It is the whole notion that if white people don't wake up now, that they will be overrun. If you watch Tucker Carlson, people like David Duke and Tom Metzger in the old days said almost the exact same thing. They said white people wake up. Immigration, the religions they are forcing down our throats, multiculturalism. It's all a conspiracy to destroy our white power. Sometimes they use more palatable language, but they are using fear rhetoric to make white people afraid that they are being overrun by these other people and forces, whether it is Islam, refugees, crime, immigrants, or even the way they talk about outsourcing of jobs. It is all rooted in that same idea that white people have to be afraid. So
I'd be surprised if they didn't put it like that. So what's going on? Like, this makes no sense. She just did it. She did it pretty well, too. She said, look, Tucker, you're mad because we ended a racist exclusionary tactics within a flawed immigration system. We ended racist tactics, and you said it's the worst attack on the country since the Civil War. She just did it.
He complained that Democrats were replacing old voters with new voters on the voter rolls. But I'm a little confused about that because all voters are American, definitionally. Only Americans can vote. So we have to ask what makes the new Americans inferior in his eyes to the old Americans. Why are legacy Americans more equal than non-legacy Americans? What makes someone who has worked hard and struggled through America's difficult immigration process, who has learned the presidents and state capitals and answers to questions that most native-born Americans probably can't answer, less worthy of participating in the society than someone whose family came in, let's say, the great immigration wave of the early 20th century? What is it about their character that makes them a bad fit? Now, Tucker is right about something. The Democrats have hoped that changing demographics will inure to their political benefit. Pundits like Steve Phillips, author of Brown is the New White, How the Demographic Revolution Has Created a New American Majority, have traipsed the political circuit for years making this argument. And I hate it. In my view, people like Phillips are part of the rot at the center of the Democratic Party. They are responsible in significant part for its failures and are culpable in part for the rise of replacement theory. In a 2018 article at The Intercept, I criticized Phillips for arguing that America's growing non-white population is key to the Democratic Party's success, and that, quote, Democrats should not waste money appealing to white swing voters. The Democratic Party is useless today. And
to me, like, look where her passion is. This has nothing to do with ending the racial caste system in America today. That's why she's a terrible representative. And this is why I said her appeal is not to earn the black vote. It's to reach out with, in a lot of instances, because I'll agree with Bernie Sanders, some common sense progressive values. If we ever do anything for black people, it'll be after that. Because this guy, who I probably wouldn't like myself, he's trying to reach out to, hey, the new demographic, new stuff, blah, blah, blah. In that sense, her and Tucker are right. There is an element, at least, of people being replaced, depending on how birth rates are going. I think it's overstated, and Bree's about to say that too. She's on point right now in the video. She shifted. The problem is she's on point with a dishonest frame, and she has no political black power agenda. Her agenda is basically Biden's. Move out of the way and let us do this progressively. Where Biden is, move out of the way and let us do this dumb centrist nonsense, whatever, with some progressiveness sprinkled here and there. That's about it. But that's all left.
The Democratic Party is useless today in part because it's been following Phillips's advice. For years now, the party has completely abandoned any effort to persuade voters of any race to pass the policies they actually want, or even to speak with him with a modicum of respect. Part of the reason is that advisors like Phillips, a senior advisor at top liberal...
And what has the Republican Party done? This is the hill. And like I said, as someone who has his issues with the Democratic Party, I really don't like them. I'm a reformed Democrat. I'm a Democrat to change them. I'm not a Democrat to go along. I don't agree with them. But you're taking a person who has positioned himself as I'm for white, with a white supremacist writer, which is basically someone helping him reach this audience. The message he has, by her word, is endorsed by Hitler, because Hitler agreed with our immigration policies. Yet instead of calling, be taken off the air, because we can't have this type of propaganda based on what it could lead to. And if you read the manifesto, the killer really understood a lot of what she's saying, that Republicans are out for corporations, they're out for the rich. So what's left? It's this whole, replacement, blah, 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 to rile up people based on someone who's supporting something that's endorsed by Hitler. She just made a case that this dude should be taken off the air. And now she's shifted to criticizing Democrats because they're trying to reach out to the new voter base. That's the only people they really want to reach out to, or whatever. They're the new demographics. And she goes by some dude's book I've never heard of. I don't think this dude is a major player in the Democratic Party. If anything, he's kind of a snitch. I don't know how else to put it. Which is fine. Snitch on the Democrats. Give us all the dirt and what they're doing. I mean, it looks like that's what they're doing. That's the only people they really try to appeal to heavy. Okay. But he's not a major player in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is out of touch. And they do reach out to white people. Man, that ain't true. They reach out to white people.
That advisors like Phillips, a senior advisor at top liberal think tank Center for American Progress, believe that white votes are a deplorable lost cause. And non-white voters, they think, will inevitably vote for Democrats, no matter how.
They're a deplorable lost cause in a sense. In a sense. Look, you don't give them health care. You righted the economy with Obama. And Biden ended the all the troops in the Middle East. He took them out. They do things that they would like if a Republican did it. A lot of white voters are too far gone. That's true. The problem with the Democrats is they don't really do their base. You know, the white voters that aren't too far gone they're not conservatives. They're liberals that are sick of them. And that's their base. Black people will come out and change the color of states. But they have to be motivated to vote heavy in high numbers. Democrats, I don't know if they're going to use the Trump boogeyman thing again. I don't see that coming, but you know what? I think Democrats are starting to realize that that's not coming either. They're starting to realize that that's not going to work.
Remember when Joe Biden told black voters in 2020 that if they didn't vote for him, they ain't black? That was just a Democrat saying out loud what so many of them believe, that non-white votes belong to them. They don't need to be earned. But they were wrong.
I have never heard her present anything when she's speaking with progressives, like she is now, quote unquote, alt left the hill, that would make me think, oh, I gotta go vote for Democrats based on what she's saying. I gotta go vote for Democrats because instead of Obamacare, we get single payer in a racial caste system. I gotta go vote for Democrats because they're gonna pay off my school loans. In a racial caste system, they'll pay off my school loans. You know, we might have to deal with murderous terrorists and all that black on black crime and all that. But they're gonna pay off my school loans, get free health care, might even get a job working at the government. Like, her message to black people is comfortable second class at best. Actually, it's not even that, because they haven't passed anything. Progressives haven't passed anything, and it's something that Sam mentions a lot, and it's true. They haven't done anything to pull white people out of poverty. The far, I shouldn't even say far, I'll just say the left, because you have the centrists. The liberals in Congress have not done anything to pull white people out of poverty. It's just white people have a lot of wealth, so they usually avoid it. But they haven't done anything, obviously, when it comes to the racial wealth gap. So what are you offering what do you ever speak about when you have the chance? You never speak about anything that would make me want to replace Democrats with something that you have. You're not a reparations advocate at all. You're an anti-reparations advocate when you get the chance. A lot of people don't know. They haven't really paid attention to Bree. But then, you know, there's going to be more on the alt left coming. This is a first shot fire cannon, but there are going to be more.
The irony is that Phillips's theory hasn't borne out. Democrats have so totally abandoned the working class, voters of all colors, that growing numbers of non-whites are looking for alternatives. Among Congress members, Republicans are the more vocal anti-interventionists right now. Marjorie Taylor Greene is out here outflanking squad members on the absurdity of giving aid to Ukraine while American babies starve. And Latinos are an important part of the Republican base. Now, this reality undermines Tucker's argument. Although he's right that Democrats hoped immigration changes would help.
She's speaking in good old days terms. This has been the Democratic Party since Carter, maybe, or after Carter. This has been the Democratic Party. They haven't been populist. But the thing is, okay, so now people are looking for alternatives. Marjorie Taylor Greene, that's an alternative? I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene has said stuff that is as high-key and obvious dog whistle racist as Tucker's. I mean, that's an alternative? That's your example? You couldn't think of a better example than that? I mean, this is just...
Although he's right that Democrats hoped immigration changes would help them politically, they haven't. Not really. Not as much as people thought. Tucker doesn't have a strong electoral argument against immigrant populations who, on the whole, are more politically conservative and more religious than Native.
That's BS. BS. They're more religious. They're more politically conservative. They vote Democrat. If you're going to be intellectually honest, the murderer, the beast, in his manifesto made it clear that he wasn't interested. He don't care who they voting for. This is about race. He knows that the Republican Party is up to some fuckery. So even if the Democratic Party wasn't out of touch and they weren't like dry snitching on themselves about how white people are lost cause, which a lot of them are, where you can give them what they need, give them what they want, but then you just run some bullshit about Dr. Seuss and CRT, and now they're like, derp, 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 derp. Yeah, there's a lot of lost cause. I mean, that's about the only thing that she said where the Democrats are right. The problem is, okay, that's a lost cause, and you do nothing to inspire the black vote. So, and there's some truth to that. So what it is they look at white people, and they see a bunch of them that are just too far gone. And then they look at black people and they're like, damn, we can do anything. And then it's like, well, what about them? Okay, we'll appeal to them. And they vote Democrat. They vote Democrat. I think Latinos are like 60 to 65% vote Democrat. And Asians, I think, are over 60%, maybe a little less. But yeah, everybody but white people votes Democrat. Now, if you want to deaggregate, I think she starts deaggregating, and that's when I stopped her on the middle.
More politically conservative and more religious than native-born Americans. And a slight liberal bias among first-generation immigrants disappears after a generation or two. They're ripe for Republican picking. And without the electoral case against immigration, I think it's fair to ask a hypothetical, as Tucker often does. What could be motivating him to see immigration as such an existential threat? Whose existence is really imperiled right now? The white American lifespan is declining right now for the first time in American history. The opioid pandemic is a scourge made worse by the COVID pandemic and the lack of universal health care. Wages haven't kept up with inflation, and both corporate parties are aligned against raising the minimum wage, even though we haven't had a minimum wage raise for the longest period in American history. And even though Americans have never worked harder for less. When Carlson focuses his ire on corruption by elites, he's right on the nose. But the fact that he fully understands that it's elite capture that's causing so many Americans to hurt right now makes it difficult for me to understand how he thinks that a relatively small and powerless immigrant group deserves as much focus as the billionaires stalling our wages, poisoning our baby food, and ruining the country. And focusing on...
God, this woman has no goddamn soul. You're lying. It's not difficult for you to understand. This is about race. You just proved it. You just proved it with the Mein Kampf thing. Like, this is so out, like, oh, I think the best way to describe it is it's just random. Now you're trying to play dumb again. You're smart. You were smart enough to demonstrate how racist Tucker Carlson was yourself. And now you're wondering, why are they mad at these immigrants coming in? Why? You just said it. It's about race. It's the race of them. Because we're not bringing them in from Europe. Well, they're Hispanic, Spain. Genetically, they're mostly European. They identify. I don't give a damn about them details. These people are one drop-ish. The murder was one drop-ish. Tucker appeals to white. White people are one drop-ish.
And focusing on small, powerless individuals rather than big corporations in control is dangerous.
I mean, seriously, ever seen somebody who was 5/16 white? You see it all the time, and you can't tell the difference.
Literally. We need to be clear about what people like the Buffalo shooter are talking about when he talks about the Great Replacement. They're not just talking about the natural immigration and population trends that have existed since the first immigrants walked out of East Africa. To replace something.
What a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Of course they're not talking about that. They're talking about what's going on in America. And you have people come in from countries that are non-European. And they have a problem with that. Now you're going to play stupid? This woman is crazy.
Is to put something new in the place of something old. It implies the old thing is gotten rid of, not simply added to. The threat suggested by Great Replacement isn't just low white birth rates or average immigration rates. It's something more pernicious, something akin to white genocide. And in fact, the Buffalo murderer describes the declining birth rate as, quote, mass genocide. And genocide is defined as the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. That's not what immigrants do. That's what the Buffalo shooter did. He hunted down Black people so they could be replaced with so-called legacy Americans, a term I find kind of funny given that few communities have as deep historical roots in America as Black Americans. After all, the Atlantic slave trade was abolished in 1808, meaning that the American descendants of slaves arrived here sometime before then. We predate the huge wave of European immigrants that arrived in this country between 1880 and 1920. 20 million immigrants arrived during those 40 years.
My goodness, this woman is a giant seesaw. Okay, you should have led with that. This leads to, okay, what happened? Now you're talking about human rights violations and you have no intention to do anything about it.
Nearly double the number of Africans forcibly enslaved and sold into bondage in the Americas over the span of 400 years. At this country's founding, Black Americans constituted 20% of the population.
This is where I left off.
And comprised 16.5% after the Civil War.
Okay, so Black people were 20% and now are 16% of the population. Now, think about this. If this woman represented Black people, she would be saying we got great replaced and it has hurt our politics. And she'd be talking about the polls when it comes to reparations and what it would look like if we weren't replaced intentionally with a racist, by her, I didn't fact check her, but by her account, a Hitler-endorsed immigration policy that, as Tariq Nasheed would call us, the foundational Black Americans, we got rid of that so you tethers could move in up in this joint. Like that, what else can I say? Like this is an example of when you are the alt-left, you are the melanated, the pretty face, somewhat articulate. I don't think she's that articulate. Because you can't be articulate if you're not going anywhere. If you're a goddamn seesaw in space.
Probably 16.5% after.
Now, I don't know what else is going to be said until the end, but there isn't that much left.
The Civil War. But that didn't last long. By 1920, at the end of the great wave of European immigration, the original racial fabric of this country had changed. The legacy Americans, Black Americans, had largely been replaced. Now, I'm not sincerely arguing for a Black version of replacement theory. I'm drawing this historical analogy to make...
Yes, you are. That is what happened. And a lot of it was intentional as far as murder. Like if you look at Devil's Punch Bowl, like they just killed a bunch of Black people to reduce the population in Mississippi. Otherwise, we'd control the state.
As the Civil War drew to a close, thus legitimately free individuals and escapees alike were captured and held in contraband camps, so named because as commodities they were considered contraband by Union troops who had no qualms about perpetrating slavery for their own benefit. 3 such camps existed in the Devil's Punch Bowl area of Natchez. A massive exodus of former slaves from southern plantations trekked northward in hopes of reaching a location of true freedom. But embittered soldiers, resentful that the people considered property were now free, had other plans. Researcher Paula Westbrook, who has extensively studied Devil's Punch Bowl, noted, when the slaves were released from the plantations during the occupation, they overran Natchez, and the population went from about 10,000 to 120,000 overnight. Unable to grapple with an instant population swell, the city turned to Union troops still lingering after the war to devise a merciless, impenitent solution. So they decided to build an encampment for him at Devil's Punch Bowl, which they walled off and wouldn't let him out. Former director of Natchez City Cemetery, Don Estes, explained. Devil's Punch Bowl is so named for a cavernous bowl-shaped gulch walled off by treetop cliffs. It was the perfect place in the heart of nature for the army to enslave people and carry out their regime of torture. The men were forced to undergo heavy labor throughout the day while the women and children were simply locked up behind the walls. Every slave man, woman, and child was starved and kept in the worst of hygiene conditions. The slaves died of torture by starvation and exhaustion. After the slaves were dead, the soldiers kept their bodies to rot inside the camps. They never cleared or buried the bodies. Instead, they provided inmates with shovels to bury their slave brothers and sisters inside the camp. They were told to bury them where they dropped. Such conditions, along with the camp's location and climate of the region, contributed to the outbreak of several diseases that infected and killed the slaves. One of the major diseases contributing to the fatality was smallpox. Estes said of the concentration camp prisoners, they were begging to get out. Turn me loose and I'll go home back to the plantation, anywhere but there. Locals say human skeletons occasionally wash free from the location in times of heavy rains and flooding. Wild peach trees now dot the basin where human beings who believed they finally won freedom from slavery were tortured and died, and these peach trees are believed to be fertilized by their bodies. Like so much about the history of the United States, sadistic acts perpetrated by officials acting on behalf of the government have been deceitfully downplayed to lessen shame and facilitate collective memory loss. Whatever the full truth about Devil's Punch Bowl, it's a veritable guarantee no history book will be honest or thorough enough to shed light on the excruciating conditions similar to Nazi concentration camps. This is the Devil's Punch Bowl.
Black problems, black issues, past, present, and future. This is...
You are arguing there was a great replacement. It's part of a conveyor belt of human rights violations. And it has rendered a second class. It has rendered a caste system, a racial caste system that is so strong, black people who work 2 jobs have less wealth than white people who are unemployed. It's so strong that black people who graduate college have less wealth than white people who dropped out of high school. You got to get a master's to have more wealth than a white person who dropped out of high school, not just a college graduate. It's so strong that you can only undo it with reparations. And if you've listened to Bree, she puts reparations on the back burner as soon as she gets around white liberals.
For folks to object to, but it's also true that the more you pile on, the more there is for people to rally around. What do you think about linking kind of more explicitly the Medicare for All movement to a movement for Black lives, which does have as part of its agenda universal health care?
And single payer specifically.
Yeah.
I'm totally on this page, Brihana. This is exactly what I think we should do. And I've been trying to do it in a kind of beginning way. We did a series webinars, Black Health, Black Liberation, where we foregrounded kind of the triple crises of state-sanctioned police violence, the pandemic, and rampant fundamental inequality. Right. And say we need a comprehensive response to those issues, and foregrounding the issue of police brutality. Because we have to, first of all, we have to acknowledge that. But secondly, so we're...
no, fuck.
Hey, yo, they about to say, yo.
So we're incorporating some of that work. We've been doing listening sessions with frontline organizations serving communities of color to say, look, you're like in an existential crisis. We get that. You're not going to be out there waving the flag for Medicare for All, but how can we integrate, right, the needs of your work and our organizing program? We've recalibrated the DSA Medicare for All organizing guide, putting up front the Medicare for All as an anti-racist demand against racial capitalism, right? Making that explicit. We've got a national strategy conference at the end of January. We're going to do a workshop called Campaign for Health Equity, a winning political strategy for single payer. And I want to link not only to the Black Lives Movement and the Breathe Act, which I wish the Breathe Act actually included Medicare for All. It's Medicaid expansion, does some other great things, but I wish it went all the way. But that, but also Representative Lee's one of the key drivers of the Health Equity Act, right, to deal directly with those issues within, structural racism within healthcare. So that's another way we've got to integrate. So I think this is the only way to succeed. And we have to acknowledge that our movement is white and old and a little out of touch. And the thing that revitalized it was, the influx of young folks, mainly from DSA. But obviously, that's got deficiencies too, in terms of breadth and reach. And so, and when I've certainly been schooled when a lot of Black folks, other people of color hear Medicare for all. As soon as they hear all, they figure, oh, that's not us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an uphill battle, and I know that there are a lot of folks who are going to be like, the whole point is it's a universal program. If you start emphasizing discrete groups, then you're undercutting its viability. But I think we cannot ignore the reality of what Bernie's vulnerabilities were in 2016, and he improved a lot in 2020, but they were still there. And it's that people feel like unless you're willing to articulate something specific for them, or at least characterize the universal program in a way that is directly appealing to a specific group, then they aren't wrong to assume, given historical precedent, that this universal program isn't going to end up touching their lives.
To tie this in to BLM based on police brutality, look, the BLM thing is based on people being murdered. Once they're murdered, free healthcare does not benefit them.
Damn.
Like this is not a real tie-in. At least with the reparations argument, like the reparations, it might be a roundabout way to argue that it's actually going to solve the problem of Black Lives Matter, or the problem that Black Lives Matter purported to be tackling. There's some validity to that. You raise people's social economic situation, they're going to have less interaction with the police and less crime. So, yeah.
Listening to Reset. And that's why she does not when Tim Black said he looked into her eyes and saw just a white woman or something like that. I'm like, I get it. I get it, because that's who she represents. She is a racist white woman, melanated version, and too smart and too Black for her own good, because she's wonking out history. I mean, she's definitely a seesaw. She isn't all down.
Theory. I'm drawing this historical analogy to make a point. The idea that rapidly changing demographics can politically disadvantage a population is nothing new. Nor is the idea that some white Americans are so threatened by changing demographics that they feel empowered to murder Blacks, Jews, Latinos, Asians, and Native Americans. Elites in this country have always understood that the best way to distract the public from their looting of wages and public wealth is to pit people against each other, to divide them up by their differences. Mainstream news pundits.
I'm smelling some class reductionism. Let's who needs race? This is about power. Let's go.
Both Fox and MSNBC would like to use racial strife as a deflection from core economic issues that hurt working people of all ethnic and national origins. That's why it's less important to focus on whether Tucker can be blamed for what happened in Buffalo, and focus more on why there has...
It's not about can he be blamed. It's that you don't have white supremacist propaganda on TV, on the radios, and in big media. It's as simple as that. And how do you know it was white? Because his writer was a white supremacist. And I hate saying it over and over again, but I mean, he doesn't really dog whistle. He just comes out and says it. Like the way he talks about when he called Iraqis primitive monkeys, and then said that white people created civilization. That's just coming out and saying you're a racist. I mean, he couldn't have even said that about Black people. Bunch of primitive monkeys. Imagine if he said that about Black people. Like, yeah, you're going to be savvier when it comes to Black people. You want Candace Owens to come on your show, who's an anti-Black racist too. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if Bree ends up on his show. I would expect it. I've seen the alt-right and the alt-left hucklebuck together all the time. Like, well, maybe not all the time, but there is a connection.
And focus more on why there has been a proliferation of hateful rhetoric that makes working Americans see other powerless Americans as the source of their troubles. So much so that some folks resort to murder. We can't let this discourse.
Started off black and it turned to powerless. Powerless Americans. I mean, this really was a seesaw on race reduction. She did race reduction almost like you would tenderize steak. Like, well, that ain't a good example because you just hit steak or whatever. You pour the pineapple or whatever you tenderize your meat with. It was more like choreographed movie. We want both sides to get some good licks in, but ultimately race reduction gets the W.
Of course, replace important conversations about how we make this country live up to its ideals for all Americans together. And so I know that's a lot, but the point I just really want.
Now she brings on Kim Iverson, and I don't know who this other dude is, but I've heard them both. And Kim Iverson, when I do the montage for the alt left, she might be the star. She's up there with Bill Maher. She's terrible. She's terrible. And she's so bad that Sergeant Willie Pete thought she was a conservative. Didn't know that she came up further to the left than the average Democrat. She's really bad when it comes to going through lengths to defend white people. But I saw the ending when these two come on. Listen to what they say.
I know that's a lot, but the point I just really wanted to make was that the conversation about Tucker, I think, is a little bit of a distraction from what the broader conversation about great replacement is doing and how much focus is being put on immigrants and immigration in a way that hasn't gotten enough scrutiny.
Yeah, I think the best way to stop the right from talking about the great replacement theory is just to point out what several of the things you pointed out in this radar, which is that it is not true that bringing in a lot of immigrant voters necessarily harms the GOP. As you pointed out, a lot of Hispanic voters, actually, especially second generation, end up having conservative views. The Republican Party is recasting itself as a party for working class people, not just for white working class people, but for working class people, and it is gaining.
And Mud mentioned about how you're politicizing a tragedy, and you're doing that in a way where it's like you have to dismiss the shooter as being insane. This is a mental health thing. This is like what happened in Texas. Even though the guy said that he was perfectly sane and, this is why he did it. And if you listen to why he did it, it doesn't matter if the people who are coming here vote Republican. This isn't about their votes. This is about their race. That's why it happened. This was about race, not about who people are voting for not about if they're conservative, if they go to church. This was about white people getting replaced. White people. And yes, maybe they're getting replaced by slightly less white people, but that's good enough for them. That they don't like that. And you can't say it's not happening. Yes, it is exaggerated. Yes, from the numbers I've seen, white people will still be the majority in this country in 50 years. From the numbers I've seen. And they'll act like, we'll go from 50% to 49%. So I'll let this play. There ain't much left.
Regard among a lot of categories of workers and ethnic groups. And Trump did really well in southern Texas, in Florida with specific immigrant groups. The most hostile people to the GOP agenda are affluent white people in this country.
Okay, now you want to deaggregate Latinos? Because if we deaggregate Latinos, then the old school Americans blow up. If we say, you Mexicans over here and you Cubans, y'all are different. You guys like voting Republican. Y'all are different. Now it's like, okay, so instead of Latinos being X amount of the population, I don't know what they are, maybe like 20% or whatever. Now it's like they're 4 and 3 and 1 and 0 point blah and blah, blah, blah. But the American descendants of slavery, ADOS, were still 12.5, 13, 14, 15. Depending on where you count, how you count mixed people. That's what we are. We can do that. We can deaggregate. But then we're having a different conversation. I like the idea of deaggregating, but the numbers aren't going to change because next thing you do is like, well, top to bottom, we're just not going to bring in some Cubans. You see what I mean? Like, they're still voting Democrat. So what are you really going to tell them? And telling them they're not going to listen. They don't care. They said this is about race. Like, the fact that you ignored this dude's white supremacist writer. Bree is a fan of that Daryl Davis dude. You know, give me the 200 KKK robes. But the problem with Daryl Davis and converting the too far gones is it's not that you can't do it. If they're willing to say, hey, look, 42, I think I'm racist, dude. Like, he's like, I used to live in this place. I went to a Klan meeting and I think maybe I am racist, you know. Can you help me? I could help them. I could help them. I can't help somebody that doesn't want to be helped. The problem with Bree and Daryl Davis's technique is they're helping them with a lie. They're lying to them. They're race reductionizing, and I'll tell them the truth. Race isn't going anywhere until you kill it. And you kill it by destroying the purpose. The purpose was to maldistribute resources. You kill it by treating black people white. And if white people were harmed this much, evident by the Italians that were lynched and got reparations, I don't even have to, like, give a hypothetical.
In this country. So
Legacy Americans.
Right. So that's true. And Tucker knows that because he rails against a lot of the college campus type people, some of the people I criticize a lot. So I think that's there are many knocks against the Great Replacement theory, but I think that should be the one that hopefully would persuade the GOP that it can win with immigrants. It's doing it.
It's doing it.
It doesn't want to win with immigrants. Fool. This is them just being typical Democrats. Like, you think you've really left the party and you're this new alt-left woke, but you're just trying to manufacture consent. They don't want them here. Trump won off building a wall, fool. This makes no sense. You can win with immigrants. Okay, I'm cool with this Cuban over here, and I like Japanese women, but we need to change the immigration patterns. Let's build a wall. Let's deport some people. Let's get rid of some of these Indians. I don't like them. These Somali. And definitely, hey, let's go back to how it was when Hitler co-signed it. Yeah, that's what we want. And you know who's going to be the most popular person on TV? The person who believes that. Yeah, but they're not too far gone.
That hopefully would persuade the GOP that it can win with immigrants. It's doing it.
Well, I think immigration is always just going to be a hot button political topic. So I don't know if there's any getting rid of it, if there's any getting rid of railing against it. One group is going to rail against it, or the other group is going to because they view it as being used as a way. I mean, not to use the term great.
Yo, Republicans rail against Pepe Le Pew and critical race theory, Dr. Seuss, Mr. Potato Head. Yeah. You can always find something that you can rail against, but you're presenting it almost like people talk about slavery. Well, it's always been, people have been doing that since the Stone Age. No, it hasn't always been. And it's definitely not always been in the format that it was in the U.S. Everybody's doing it mentality. It removes responsibility. But since you're trying to reach out to a crazy cult, that likes to believe lies, that'll tell you that Antifa invaded the Capitol, and that's like one of their better conspiracy theories, that'll ignore the fact that Donald Trump's name was on the pedophile island itinerary. I mean, let's be real. Let's be thorough here.
Not to use the term great replacement, but certainly they see it as a threat, as a political threat, saying, well, the other political parties trying to import in people that are aligned with them. And I think that
basically what I'm saying is Obama in his first 4 years deported more people than Trump did in his 4 years. Obama was in a lot of ways harder on immigration. They don't care because Obama was black. Now, do I think all Republicans are too far gone? No. Do I think all Democrats are in a state where they aren't too far gone, having at least like a core philosophy, an agenda, it means that I have a litmus. Where are you on reparations? If I just say reparations for slavery, I get 10% of Republicans. If I say slavery, blah, 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 mix it all in there, and I say it's just for the descendants of that, I can maybe get 15% of Republicans. 85% is too far gone. If you have an agenda, if you know what you're looking for, if you have a purpose. But if you're just like the face of the alt left, then I don't know. Like I don't understand why they think that they can reach out and gain this many Republicans. Are they just bought by like Republican think tanks? Do they work for Republicans? Because I mean, what was that show that just got taken off the air that was owned by Republicans, at Black News Channel? What was it called? Was it called Black News Channel? I don't remember. The one with that guy always confused with Van Jones. Mark Lamont Hill. I mean, hey, it wasn't that bad as far as I mean, they at least they had Yvette Carnell come out and drop $20 trillion on reparations. I mean, like I'll say that was the highlight of the 2 years of the Black News Channel, is Yvette Carnell's $20 trillion of Lamarck Hill. It was owned by conservatives. It still operated like a left-leaning channel that at least dropped one little, where we at, represented black people one time, more than once. I mean, they had a few more people, but I mean, the $20 trillion, that came out of the Black News Channel. I'm off on a tangent, but the point I was making is I wonder sometimes who owns Bree. It looks like the end result is you're trying to fluff up Bernie Sanders politics, and you have a market for it, I guess. I don't understand the Hills. I mean, they 100,000 views. I don't really understand their appeal. Do they appeal to sort of populists who want to hear a common sense take? Is that what you're aiming for? But who controls that? Because there's no real end game. There's no pursuit of power. Everything that you're accusing the Democrats of doing with the black vote, with black people in general, you're doing. The alt-left does the same thing. You don't see the alt-left humping for reparations. You see the alt-left humping to render black people a more comfortable second class, which is the same thing the Democrats are doing. They're just doing it more from the center in general. She's always like, and you see this more with Kim Iverson, but you saw it here. You have a Republican who has a white supremacist writer dropping all kinds of clues that, hey, I'm for white people. She exposed low-key how he's endorsed, like how he favors an immigration policy that's endorsed by Hitler. You have that, yet you spin it to criticizing the Democratic Party. Even though her policies that she argues for, that we need to go towards, are significantly left to center. They are like Bernie Sanders policies. Her message is rub white people's back. You're not racist. Let's race reductionize. The Democrats are messed up. It's like low appeal to, I don't know what kind of Republicans, but it makes me wonder why. Where does this come from? Like, I get real kind of conspiratorial because it's really inconsistent. It's really a seesaw. It's like I say, she's a seesaw in space. Just back and forth, no guidance, floating.
And people that are aligned with them. And I think that argument is as old as time. I don't think that is new to Tucker Carlson or new to the climate that we're in right now politically. And if it weren't immigration, it would be something else. And it is other things, right? I mean, we're seeing constantly this pointing the finger, as you mentioned, Brianna, not focusing on the real issues that are causing the strife in middle-class America.
Yeah, it's Dr. Seuss, but you don't want to criticize the Republicans over some Dr. Seuss.
And go on family vacations once a year, you know, the good, to live the American dream. The stuff that's attacking that, not at all. Instead, we're doing a lot of finger pointing, and it's either it's immigrants or it's going to be woke liberals and trying to get rid of police officers, or
Hey, I'll give her credit there. That's like the first time she really made fun of the right wing in a while. It's been a while. She's been on that conservative tit for a while. But you make a good point. Yes, woke liberals was a worthless distraction that has nothing to do with anything. Yeah, and you were preoccupied with that nonsense. So yeah, a little self-criticism. She's impressed me for the first time in a long time.
Or it's going to be, the critical race theory, or
did it again,
or it's Nazis and everybody's a right winger. There's always some sort of finger pointing and blaming, and most of it is.
But the thing is, rolling and I say this, and I don't want to say I'm just completely against immigration, but immigration is more of a tangible policy that affects us, and you've seen, a lot of you more than me, you have people who have outlined how it has more of an effect on African Americans. Like, I've seen a bunch of examples. Now, I haven't really gone too deep in fact checking this, but when you're talking about jobs that are available for people, and like I said, I haven't gone too deep into it. It's not my lane. I don't have that much desire to go into how we're affected by immigrants economically. But I trust the people who have done it. I don't think it's just out of bigotry and spite to outline how black people are affected by immigration economically, because it makes sense. So it is a tangible thing. You can't just roll that into woke liberals and the whole culture war hysteria and all that. Or someone like Talib Kweli calling everybody a Nazi. You can't just roll that in there like that.
Sort of finger pointing and blaming, and most of it is unproductive. But I don't think we're going to get rid of the immigration debate in this country. I think it's just a debate that
we could just say, look, we're overcrowded. Let's close the borders. Every now and then we'll have a lottery or whatever, and we'll leave it at that. We could. It'd be easy. This whole 17 minutes didn't change the fact. No, you can't just say, well, the people here that we bring in, they vote Republican. So you're not really addressing the issue that people have. And that's where we're bankrolling all these immigrants who are moving in while we're running a racial caste system.
Country. I think it's just a debate that's been as old as time, and it's been around forever, and I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah, liberals...
That means you can't take responsibility for it.
Talk about their own version of great replacement theory so they don't have to talk about the real issues, and Republicans are happy to talk about these kind of culture wars, not have to talk about the real issues. And I'd love for everyone just to wake up and not be so seduced by it. Thank you guys both for your engagement there. But next up, Project Veritas is out with a new leaked video of a Twitter executive spilling the tea, this time with a direct hit against Elon Musk. Stick around for that.
His closet, because every time they left the Klan, they would give it to him, and it was kind of like a notch on his belt, this black guy. And when interviewed and asked, how do you do it? He says, well, I start by asking them to come and sit down and have a Coke with me. And I ask them if they have kids, and I say, I have kids, and we talk about our kids, and they realize that I love my child, and I'm a father, and I'm a parent. We have this very basic thing in common. Now, I wouldn't accuse that man of being indifferent to racism, not caring about racism, trying to hide the fact that obviously what's driving him is a desire to decouple these men from their conscription into a virulently racist sect, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the step one isn't for him, practically, hi, you're a Klan member, you're racist, stop, I hate you, which everyone would have every justification to say to anybody.
Again, who the fuck is doing this? I talked to many of white people on the Twitter during the elections. And I don't just remember going around to random white people who had said nothing wrong, just saying you're fucking racist and I hate you, do reparations. I don't remember those being the conversations I was having with white people. Not most of them, but a lot of you Bernie supporters was telling me to take my nigga ass back to Africa, or I could have reparations when I took my nigga ass back to Africa, or niggas should go back to Africa and then maybe we'll. It was some iteration of that, but there was a lot of niggas coming from the left, the progressive, the white, liberal, progressive racists. Y'all got a lot of racists in your tent,